projects together, not just our individual projects. Toward the end of day 2, we'll hear from Kimberlyn Butler and Liza Herzog, 2 newer colleagues to the GPN who've already begun to share critically important information with us around fundraising strategies. And we're going to get a little taste of what they have to offer on day 2 with the knowledge they bring to this endeavor. We see that as the beginning of a longer-term process. We really hope to engage Liza and Kimberlyn and others, and specifically people from the funding communities with whom we're working, to come together for a longer forum to think through more realistic strategies for making all of this happen. And finally, we want to focus on sponsorships a little bit. We're fortunate that the GPN has 2 sponsorships in place already. And we thank Railstop Realty and Community Development, LLC of Northern Michigan, and FCS, a nonprofit organization from Brazil, for their sponsorship of this first summit. So these 2 organizations each donated $25,000 to help get us started. And that money will be used to help pay for some of the costs of this event, but also costs moving forward. And hopefully that will stimulate others to help sponsor the important work of the GPN. Obviously, we all know it takes financial resources to make this work happen and to keep it moving forward. A little bit on the nature of possibility development, and this is in the interest of creating a common language. Most, if not all, of the programs working with us are aware of these 5 steps, but just a little bit of a summary for the 2 days that follow. We're going to hear more. We might hear a little more about this in the possibility mentoring presentation that follows. But, learning to walk the talk 5 steps at a time. Let me say this before going into the specifics. The 5-step model we use for possibility development is not really that innovative. It is really a synthesis of steps that we see in youth development work in one way or another. We also see it in cognitive behavioral counseling and psychotherapy approaches, and more implicitly in other counseling and mentoring approaches. So we see these as 5 steps pretty much every project takes, but making them more explicit allows us to work at them. So the first step we typically think of as exploring interests. When we talk about possibility development, we don't mean necessarily the possibility to have a good career or the possibility of getting to college. Although those are focuses that are often pursued and they're obviously critically important, but possibility development can relate to any possibility a young person is interested in, including building stronger relationships or self-worth, for example. But the beginning of this process is an exploration of interests. And we find it stunning over and over again how little opportunity there is in our schools and in other settings for young people to explore their own interests. In our academic curricula, for example, students are typically exposed to content, or what I sometimes call external content, that is content not linked to their internal lives. So there's a space needed for exploring what matters to the person or student or young person themselves. So exploring those interests is critically important. We don't do that just at one point in time. If we think about our own lives, we're always exploring or refining our interests. So this is a cyclical process or an iterative process that we come back to time and again. The second step we call prioritizing interests for taking action. All of us have lots of interests, but which ones do we prioritize in order to move forward in a really sustained way? I was rereading some earlier work on possibility development that I'd written with Eric Tishalis in a book called Understanding Youth. And in that book, we talk about the necessity of prioritizing in order to put forward sustained effort toward achieving goals. In developmental psychology and in counseling psychology, we frequently talk about the thought-action gap. Why it is that we don't act on what we know is right or what we want to pursue. And part of the reason for that gap is we don't prioritize carefully enough. and place enough emphasis on those interests or goals that really matter most to us. In fact, it's often easier to focus on the secondary things than the things that are of most importance. So the third step we see in all of these models typically is planning. It's hard to move forward in action without a clear plan. So we help young people plan for getting to college, plan for getting a better job, and in some of our possibility mentoring work, planning to get into a good high school if you're a middle school student. But it's hard to take action without a clear plan. So step 3 is planning. And the fourth step is taking action itself and keeping it going. And here is where we find that not just young people, everybody falls short when they fall short. It is hard to sustain action toward desired goals. Why is that the case? It's often the case because the support structures aren't strong enough. It might be the case that self-confidence isn't strong enough. There are lots of reasons why it is hard to maintain sustained action. In a study I did with colleagues a number of years ago, we interviewed students from a Los Angeles public school who we followed them from high school into college and saw that a number of them left college despite it being a primary goal because other responsibilities came up, responsibilities for helping take care of family and siblings' children. So contextual factors often interfere with action. We have to understand what it is that makes sustained action so challenging and do our best to allow it to move forward. Then the fifth step is, of course, assessing how we're doing. And that assessment process not only allows us to look at progress and growth, but to even assess whether we're on the right path. Do we want to stay the course or do we want to move? So I often share a personal example in this regard. I was able to get to college by pursuing journalism. I wanted to become a fiction writer, and some people still claim that as an academic, I'm a fiction writer. But that process of getting to college allowed me to reassess whether I was doing what I really wanted to, and I ultimately became a psychologist. So progress is anything but linear in most cases, but the assessment process is critical in helping young people figure out to assess how they're doing and whether they're on the right pathway is critically important. So the final point here after the 5 steps, nobody walks alone. Each of these steps are taken together with communities of support and ultimately networks of support. So what we're going to see throughout today and tomorrow are different parts of what could become a holistic network. Tomorrow we'll hear from really interesting entrepreneurial endeavors that integrate possibility development approaches into apps, for example, for college readiness and for other types of work. So we're seeing lots of innovative things happening in this realm that we'll get a taste of over the next 2 days. For some reason, I am not able to go down to the next slide. Let me try something else. Sorry about that. I lost the capacity to go to the next slide. Let me try it again, see if I can get there. I'll do it this way. Maybe this will make it a little easier for me to move things forward. Okay, so this isn't quite as pretty, but it gets to the point. This is a thank you all and a handoff to the next part of the presentation. You'll see that Andy's work with our research team builds kind of organically on what I touched on above. So there's not a need for more content really on what we're doing. But a thanks to all those who have made this event happen. And of course, there are many people other than these folks who have been pivotal here, but Andy Danilchik, as I've mentioned, who envisioned the GPN with me as part of our project for mental health and optimal development a number of years ago. And Andy and I have worked closely on many possibility projects since then. Andrew Babson has worked with Andy and me for several years to take the first steps in making the GPN a reality. Flavio, as we heard, is a postdoctoral fellow, but he's really coordinated this work as part of his fellowship over the past year in the must say in Flavio's case, the commitment to this and making a career transition has just been extraordinary. Sasha Mejia is a relatively new doctoral student with us who's been helping to coordinate the Latin American work and has just shared good ideas pretty much every day in our interactions. And Mingjun Wang is a master's student here and a longtime entrepreneur from China who's helping us coordinate a good deal of the Asian work. And, you know, these things just begin to touch on what these folks have contributed. Sharon, as I mentioned, is a decades-long partner in this work, but has recently stepped in as well to help us more precisely define some of the things we want to do with the GPN. And in her inimitable way, has brought in new partners who are really helping move things forward, including Liza Herzog, a research and evaluation specialist from Drexel University. Liza's already been providing insights in our several meetings together that have really opened our eyes to ways of doing this work more effectively. So we can't thank Liza enough. And Kimberlyn Butler is a longtime specialist in the world of philanthropy who was here at GSE as a doctoral student now, and really wanting to connect philanthropy with youth development in important ways. And Kimberlyn also, in her brief time with us to date, has already contributed strongly in this way. You know, other folks who I didn't mention on the slide, but who have been pivotal. Mike Rovine is a professor here at Penn GSC who specializes in quantitative methods. And the way Mike talks about his work and addresses it with us allows us to see progress in particular ways. We're privileged to have Mike participate in a presentation over these 2 days that will help us understand aspects of quantitative measurement related to this. And I earlier mentioned Dr. Schneider Munoz, who has been working with me for years, including organizing the 3-volume books that we wrote to get this project started. And without Dr. Schneider Munoz involved in that, we could have never built the network we did. In fact, when I think about a possibility development network, Dr. Schneider Munoz is the first person who comes to mind. He is the networker par excellence, especially on behalf of healthy youth development. So I know I'm missing multiple important people, including our longtime partners from Nicaragua and China and elsewhere, whose dedicated work in so many ways has helped make all of this a reality. And then finally, I would like to say to, you know, 2.5 decades of my students, master's and doctoral students at Harvard and Penn over the years, all of you have pushed this work forward and helped me think about it in different ways. And seeing the possibilities that you have enacted in your own lives has really kept this work alive for me. So thanks to everybody who's been involved, and thanks especially to those who stick with us on the ride ahead. We know there is much work to do, and we look forward to doing it with you. So with that as an introduction to the process for these next couple of days, I want to hand it off to Andy Danilchik so the Possibility Mentoring team has time to present that work and take us the next step forward.